Hello, my Patreons. No waxing lyrical from me today, I assure you, and I do really appreciate your feedback on that last week's video. It's good to know. Anyway, today we're talking about a very specific subject, and it's one that I feel you guys deserve rather than perhaps the general public. And the reason for that is I want to talk about how to link dream sequences, future sequences, flash forwards and flashbacks into your master plot, into your main story. Now, everyone gets nervous when the cleric casts future auguries, or when the telepath looks into the future and has a moment. And yet, the future sequence, the foreshadowing moment, the look into the future and see what happens moment, is a quintessential part of storytelling. It really is a very powerful tool that allows you to make stuff up and hopefully let it happen. Now, I'm going to give you an example of that. I was running a campaign that ran for a very, very long time, and we had a lot of fun doing it. And I think I had 4 or 5 players. It's difficult to keep track because they kept dying all the time. Not the players, their characters, but I had a bunch of characters that were all together, and they discovered this wooden bowl with a needle through a cork in it. And whenever one of them would pick up the bowl, the cork would do something different. In the case of one character, his character picked up the bowl, and the cork immediately burst into flames and turned to dust. The moment they put the bowl down, the cork reappeared. Another character picked the cork up and it spun around for a little while and then pointed north, directly upwards. So not north on the compass points, just north, straight up into the heavens. Another character picked up the compass and it just spun in different directions with no kind of goal. What was it doing? As the GM, I didn't have a clue. I had no plans. It was just spinning, doing weird and random and wonderful stuff. That was it. They decided it was then a good idea to throw this device into a magic infernus machine and cause the whole thing to explode. They did that and shattered space-time, and all of the planes kind of started to leak together and all that kind of stuff. But I needed to somehow link all of that into the story. So it was almost, they discovered subsequently later on, and to my own personal detriment for a few weeks, that the compass that they had found, this cork needle thing, pointed to their destiny. It pointed to their future. Now, of course, the player whose cork had burst into flames couldn't figure out what their future was, because why would the cork burst into flames? The other player, whose needle pointed straight up into the air, also couldn't figure out what it meant. And of course, the one whose compass just spun idly didn't have a clue either. Neither did I. But I had hinted at some kind of future, and I needed desperately to try and make that come to fruition. Now, fast forward 6 months, the players have forgotten all about the compass, and to a lesser degree so had I, until one of them mentioned, oh, I wonder what that compass was all about. Well, lo and behold, I then started to try and figure it out. And by sheer dint of the number of seeds that I had thrown around in the subsequent adventures and missions and things towards my master plot, I discovered that the character who had the compass burst into flames and turned to ash actually was the Empress of Hell. She just didn't know it yet until the demons started appearing and saying, "Mistress, we need you down below. It's chaos since your father died." Once she assumed the mantle of hell, of course, flame and dust and ash ensued, and it was fantastic. The players still didn't work out the link to the compass. They had forgotten. The next character, a paladin of some reputation, had slowly started to garner a reputation for slaying gods, and with the help of a friend of his managed to kill most of them, and eventually rose to becoming the one true god of the campaign. And then the player said, but didn't your compass point directly up into the heavens? Your compass predicted that you would ascend. Well, that's fascinating. And her compass predicted she would become the Empress of Hell. Oh my gosh. And then suddenly they went off and they solved the whole mystery for themselves as to what this compass was doing. Now, that's a very long-winded explanation of how I managed to weasel my way out of a tight corner, where I had come up with this fabulous MacGuffin and didn't know what to do with it. So when you start doing dream sequences and future projections, it becomes even more difficult because you're trying to predict what the party is going to be like in 10, 15 levels or in 10, 15, 20 months. And that can be really, really, really taxing, especially if you don't know if they're going to sit and play the entire campaign or not. Because the last thing you want is to have to retcon some kind of, oh yeah, his character was with you in the dream sequence, but he hasn't played with us in 6 months because we kicked him out of the group because he was a dick. Okay, well, just you don't remember his part. That became very difficult. So what I have adopted in my abilities to try and make a future prediction work is generally I try and limit it to the players whom I know are totally dedicated to the game and who will be there regardless of what happens. Those who aren't generally find that their character has died mysteriously or is not part of the group for inexplicable reasons. And I leave them inexplicable and will work them out when the time comes that they are now in that future space, only it's now the present. What I also do is I seed in a few NPCs that I know I can keep alive for the duration of the campaign, and I use them primarily in those dream sequences where they're older and wiser or whatever the situation calls for in that future sequence. Now, oftentimes what I do with that future sequence as well is I use it as a warning. If players are playing characters and the characters are straying from the path or the characters are not really doing what they set out to do originally, maybe the future is a warning that the current course of action they're taking will lead them down a dark path. On the other hand, maybe it's also some kind of warning of their future, that if they don't do something now, usually it's a subplot or a plot that they have forgotten about and that I want to bring back onto the table. They suddenly remember, oh, remember when we found that book on dragons and we didn't read it, we just kind of packed it into the cart. We didn't read it and look what happened, dragons everywhere, and it's all our fault because we didn't go back and we didn't look and we didn't read. So that's a really, really important device that you can use to tell the future, but you also leave it vague. You don't give hundreds of details, and when the players ask NPCs, so what happened to Brian? The NPCs usually should return with some kind of witty, derisive, outright lie and say, well, we all know what happened to Brian, and I hate to bring it up again. It makes my heart burst. We haven't really said what happened to Brian. Is he alive? Is he dead? Did he betray the party? Did he not betray the party? Did he leave the party? Who knows? Well, certainly the PCs don't, and it allows you to keep him alive or let him die depending as the campaign unfolds and not be seen as being a false revealer of the future. Another thing to do, and this is occasionally something that I have done in the past as well, especially when I realize that the future that I've given them is dramatically changing and there's very little that I can do to bring it back so that it remains true on course, is for the characters to meet a diviner who stumbles up to them later on and says, oh, I've detected a change in the timelines. Things have been altered. Someone peered into the future and has now changed how it will unfold. For they know knowledge which no mortal should know. Oh, betide us, our futures have changed irrevocably, and now we face uncertainty. I shall go and have a look and see what's going to happen next Tuesday, because I've got my laundry out and I don't want it to rain. Bring in a PC or an NPC who warns the characters that these future sights, these future visions, may not always be true, and that by just simply observing them, we change them. And if they question that, just say that it has something to do with Schrodinger's cat and quantum collapse, and leave it at that. Let them work it out from there on their own. Using a vision, though, can be incredibly, incredibly powerful in terms of your master plot as well. If the PCs don't seem to be particularly engaged in your master plot, or if they haven't really put the pieces together, a future vision, a dream sequence, some kind of sense of what's going to happen can often bring them back on track. And that's a really powerful tool that you can add to your arsenal. Now, in terms of bringing them back on track, you don't give them the whole master plot, but you do introduce a shadowy character who calls them my child, or something that will allow them to realize that there is a dark thing that's happening, and that if they don't try and find it, if they don't enact now, they will suffer the consequences in the future. Whether it's even just a torture sequence of the character, or maybe one of the characters has become evil. Now, oftentimes when you tell characters that they're going to change, or if you tell characters that they are in the future going to be evil or malicious towards the party, there are a few steps you can take later on to ensure that that starts to become a threat. Now, it is important that the character does not become the enemy of the party, does not become malicious towards them, but treads that fine line where they could if the player doesn't make good decisions. So it allows you to give a little bit of a poke to perhaps a player who's not really engaged in the game, or who is engaged in the game, but who may just need a good old jolt of, well, this is something interesting. So when they start making decisions against the party, suddenly the party starts going, but didn't you see that in your future? Didn't you see that you would come against us? And remember what we did to you in that future dream sequence? We cut your head off. Oh, I wonder if you should still make that same decision. So it really allows you to bring an alignment to the entire situation and to, well, push your own agenda. And as the GM, part of it is about making a story cohesive, part of it is about making the whole thing work, and about bringing the PCs together and making sure that they cooperate and tell a great story. So this is just another arsenal in your toolbox of arsenals, of tools and arsenals and things. This is just another tool in your toolbox, or another weapon in your arsenal, and preferably not a tool in your arse. This is some kind of situation that you have control over and that you can use to great effect. I hope this has been a little bit insightful and helpful in how to use the future to really work your master plot and to bring players back online and inline. Until next time, thank you for being a Patreon, thank you for watching, and happy gaming.